Hello and welcome to this episode of Quake It Up. In this episode, I'm going to be trying to look at two things coming from some suggestions that I've had from comments in some of my other videos. The first one is to look at, quite simply, is Quakerism right for me? Is Quakerism something I should be doing? And next bit, should the answer be yes, how do you actually get started in attending a meeting for worship? How does that all happen? What are the thought processes? What things might you need to consider before becoming a Quaker or starting your Quaker journey? And how do you go to your first meeting for worship? So we're going to get into all that today. I think most importantly for most people, it is going to be a very, very personal thing. And obviously, I'm not going to stand here and say, well, if you're this sort of person, you definitely should be a Quaker. Clearly, it's got to be something that is that resonates with you, and ultimately only you will be able to know whether or not Quakerism is right for you. But what I was hoping to do is give some thoughts as to what being a Quaker might be, what some of the things you might need to uphold, and how it might impact your life and things like that. My first bit of advice would be to do some research. So if you're watching this video, then that's a good bit of research. Check out some of my other ones. See what you think of them. Check out other videos. I'm not the sole voice of Quakerism. Have a look at some of the other Quaker vloggers and bloggers that are around. Do a lot of reading. I did a lot of reading. And just trying to find out how all of it works. Maybe try and have a look a bit about the history, who Quakers are today. Visit Quakers in Britain website. Have a look at what they're saying in there, and have a look at some of the core principles of Quakers as well. The first thing that you might notice when researching Quakerism is that it seems that there's lots of different types of Quakerism, and that's true. And if you're in America, you've got a lot harder time with that because there's lots of different Quaker meetings doing lots of different types of things, being quite different from one another. And that takes a bit more research just to work out, well, which one actually should I be going to? In the UK, you have less to choose from, which might make at least that journey simpler for you. Speaking as a British Quaker, I'm going to be talking about the British Quaker landscape because that's obviously what I know. I'm yet to visit any American Quaker meetings, and I would be thrilled to do it, but obviously there's a lot of water to go across to be able to get there. So in case this might be a phrase that you may have seen in your research already, Quakers in Britain are known as sometimes known as liberal Quakers. That's basically just a term which is used when differentiating British Quakerism, if you like, to other types of Quakerism that exist around the world, of which there are quite varied. So what this would mean is that Quakers in Britain meet generally on Sunday, though there can be other meetings throughout the week as well, and maybe sort of smaller group sessions as well. And you would meet in silence for around an hour, and then afterwards there's kind of community time and a good old chin wag afterwards. In that meeting, you are looking to develop a relationship with the divine. Now, in liberal Quakerism, what you choose to call that is up to you, and there's no pressure at all in liberal Quakerism to have any strict belief in God or the Christian God or any specific spirituality at all. The only thing that is required is that, and what Quakers believe is that we best commune with that divine spirit in silence and in ministry from others in the community. Now that might seem a bit of an oxymoron. How can you give ministry if you are meeting in silence? Well, if you feel so led by the divine to give a message to the others, then that's when you speak. But we'll get into all that a bit later when we look into how to get started, how to go to your first Quaker meeting. Some phrases that I think are instantly very important, and you'll probably hear straight away, and you may have already found out already if you've been doing any form of research, even just very light research into Quakerism, as that of the inward light. You might also hear inner light, inward teacher, light, lots of different words for all talking about the same thing. And in the liberal tradition, this is often used as a way to it comes from it goes right the way back to the early Friends writings, early Quaker writings about what they felt was speaking to them in ministry, but is used today as a way to explain that relationship in a way that is open to other faiths as well. Another one is that of God in everyone. And this is, again, I've done a video on this. It's a very complicated phrase as to what might have originally been meant by it, but certainly by a lot of Quakers by it today is what it's meant by that is that there's an integral worth and value in everyone, regardless of their spiritual background or their current spirituality or anything really, that everyone has this integral value because they have access to this divine communication that we're all trying to harness and listen to in meeting. Quakers also look to uphold certain testimonies in their day-to-day interactions. They're grouped together in various acronyms. I've done one looking at STEP, so that is simplicity, truth, equality, and peace. These are some of the core values of Quakerism. Do check out that video, or do have a look at how Quakers have lived to uphold that. But I think something that's really important is in Quakerism is that it does demand a certain change in your life, shall we say. When a common phrase to say that you have we don't tend to say that you've been converted to Quakerism. We tend to say that you've been convinced of Quakerism, and in that process is one of self-reflection and maybe looking into yourself and think there are things in my life that I might need to change and do differently. And we look to the testimonies to help us do that, whether that's how we live our day-to-day interactions, how we view ourselves in society, what we think needs to change in society, and all of that means that we must be different, and as we enhance our Quakerishness, a change in our outlook towards life is quite normal. In the UK especially, I think Quakers are people who have to be very open people, people who listen to that of God in everyone, as we say, and are free from prejudice when doing so. So, for example, in Quaker meetings, as I've mentioned, there will be some people in that meeting who might hold to Christian beliefs. There might be some who absolutely do not and are quite fervently atheist, maybe. You might have people who are in between. You might have people who come from completely different religious backgrounds entirely, and yet they're all meeting in the same space. And so when ministry is given to that person who might deliver it in a particularly Christian way or a particular atheist way or maybe a particular Hindu way or whatever it is, we have to be open to that and see how that ministry speaks to us. And so we always have to be listening twice. Some practical things you might need to think about as well is, are you available on Sundays? Would you be able to go to a meeting that might take a lot of the day? Are you willing to give that time? I think that can be quite tricky. People have, we're trying to balance work life and all that sort of stuff, and that can take time away. If it helps, there are online meeting for worship which you can attend, and that's actually going to be one of my points as to how to get into Quakerism. And certainly in terms of helping you in your research, maybe you can try that first, because going online is way less stressful socially than going in person. Another really good place to start might be the advices and queries. They're a set of advices and queries that we put in our big Quaker book on how to be a Quaker and how Quakerism is run and everything like that. There are about 42 of them. They're quite pithy, so you're not going to be reading a massive tome or anything. And they explain Quaker values in quite a thought-provoking way. So have a look at those and see what they make you feel. Is this something that you think you'd like to pursue? Following on from that, do you have any questions? And you can then take those to meeting as well, should you do so. All right then, so let's get into it. So you've decided, okay, I've done my research, I've done my reading, I think that's something that I would like to do, but what do I do next? So as I said, have a look at attending an online meeting for worship. I think that's a really good way, because the people who run those, It's run by a company called Woodbrook, who are a Quaker company, and they basically are our educational branch, so to speak, and research centre. So they obviously know a lot about Quakerism, and they do in that sort of explain what a Quaker meeting for worship should look like and what is expected and so on. So they set it out really quite nicely, I think, and I've used those a couple of times. I've used online meeting for worship maybe when I haven't been able to get over to my meeting house, or when I was moving, for example. That was very helpful in that sort of time period then. And yeah, so they're very knowledgeable, and you get to see and quite a lot of different people there, and there are some people who are there every time, and you get to know the people who run. You get to see the people who run it again and again, and you kind of build that rapport, which is nice. And there's time afterwards you can stay and talk if you have any further questions about Quakerism or anything like that as well. So I think that's a good place, a good initial step. So I would do that. But let's say you've done that, you're like, right, yes, I want to go to a real one. I really want to dive in. Or maybe you think, the online thing isn't for me. I think, I'd rather just go straight away. How do I do that? On the Quakers in Britain website, there's a meeting finder. Now, you might know where your local meeting is because you might have seen it around and about or whatever, but you might not. You might live in like me. I live in Cornwall, and there isn't a meeting house in my village. Where is my nearest one? I don't know, and so you're looking and you're trying to find where is it. So have a look on there, and you type in your postcode, and it basically tells you where your local meeting is. There's even also an opportunity to contact the meeting if you want, so you can send an email that way, and it tells you a little bit about the meeting house as well. So the meeting house is where we meet. Obviously, we don't call it a church in the UK. Some branches of Quakerism do call them churches, but in the UK we don't. It will let you know, for example, if there's a children's meeting available there. So if you're bringing children, then it lets you know, well, will there be stuff available for them? Because the way that children do Quaker meeting is, depending on their age, but if they're young, is a bit different to obviously how how adults would do it. And then so you go. What's that like? So I've been an attender at 2 Quaker meetings now. So I've kind of got a bit of an idea. So I've done that initial first meeting twice, and it is a bit stressful in the same way that you're basically at any social event that you're going to where you're the only one. Maybe bring a friend. And that's probably what I should have done. I didn't, but maybe that might be a good thing. So at least you've got someone that you know. Another tip might be to get there early. The reason, not super early, but try and aim to be there maybe quarter of an hour, maybe 20 minutes beforehand on your first time, just because that way what tends to happen is that when people are arriving to meeting, there's normally someone at the door, and so their job is to welcome people who are coming to the meeting. And often, a lot of times, that's someone just to greet people as they come in, and they're people that they see often, but they're also there to be on the lookout for newcomers. And so you can introduce yourself, say, I'm just going for my first time, I'm just interested. They might give you a couple of things to look at. They may give you the advices and queries and a nice little takeaway booklet for you to look at, and maybe kind of explain what might go on in a bit more detail. Obviously, if you've done all this research, then you'll know what's going to happen. But it's good to know how it might work in that meeting, because there are slight differences in every meeting. So that might be something important to know. So what does a Quaker meeting house look like? Well, probably not like if you've had any sort of Christian background before. It definitely doesn't look like a church. Quaker meeting houses, I suppose, like churches, can look very, very different. You can have ones which are simply rooms in a building. The Quakers may have rented it out for the meeting for worship, so it might be like a public space, it might be a village hall, or something like that, or it might be a purpose-built Quaker meeting house. Even those, though, can be very different depending on when they're built. The one where my first one was relatively modern. I don't think it was super old, and so, but was effectively a couple of rooms. There was a big meeting room with chairs set up in a circle with windows on all sides. The meeting that I'm going to at the moment is very, very different. It's a very, very old building. I think it's 18th century building with a thatched roof and daubed walls and all that. And it's set up quite differently. That those long lines of benches going in, sort of like pews, I suppose. But then on the other side, there's a place where there's a more circular group of chairs. It doesn't matter, but effectively, a circle is a common way that they're put out, but there may be others. Word to the wise in terms of what to wear before going to meeting for worship, I would go for comfortable, and probably maybe with a couple of layers, because sometimes meeting houses aren't known for necessarily being the warmest places. So I would have layers and something comfy. Maybe bring a cushion as well, because if you're on the classic Quaker bench, that is not a comfortable thing to be on for a vast amount of time. I think the thing that bewilders first timers when they come in is what's going on. So you're led into this room, and what do you do? And the answer is sit in silence. So Quaker meetings don't start like with a procession of priests or whatever, like you might have in other services. A Quaker meeting starts when two people meet. So when the first Quaker comes into the meeting room, basically when you come into the meeting room, you are starting your worship, and so when you go in, don't expect people to be necessarily waving at you or trying to talk to you or anything like that. They won't, because you're in the meeting. So they will be starting their silent meeting for worship. So I wouldn't also go around and like try and talk to people or anything like that. So I would at that point find a place to sit, make sure you're comfortable. And what will effectively happen now is some meetings are different, but it's effectively going to be an hour roughly normally, where the meeting is mostly silent. And what will happen is there may be some vocal ministry, which is where someone might stand up and might address the meeting with a message that they feel they've been led to share. I would say this is probably something that's really actually hard to do if you've had no real experience in being silent for an hour, which is not something that I think modern society prepares us for in any way, which is why it's so good. Maybe you've done things like meditation, maybe you've done silent retreats or something like that before, but generally most people have never experienced that before, so that can be something that's really quite difficult. So some things to think about, you might give yourself an intention. You might start with a prayer. You might focus on your breathing. You might ask yourself, well, why have I come here? What led me to come to this Quaker meeting? Why have I taken this step? And just see what happens. See what comes to you. I think if you are going for your first time, I would probably advise, unless you are absolutely certain that you have been given a leading to share, that you probably won't feel led to give any ministry, most likely on your first time. And I think that's probably for the best, because I think you might need to see how people do it if you've never done it before. And I think there's something to be said with when you know the grooves of the meeting. I think the leadings come a lot easier. I think I found that as well. I think it took me a couple of times before I gave ministry at either of my meetings, but then once you've been there for enough time, and you kind of get a good understanding of how that might be, and how it works, and what to say and how to say it. So I probably, unless you are certain, but if you're beginning your Quaker journey, you might not know what certain is. And so, I'm sure if it is a true leading, it will come back, and you can do it later when you feel a lot more aware of how to do it. But I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying it's probably unlikely that you will have a leading, and whether or not you would know to trust it or not. But listen to the ministry that's given. Listen to anything that's being shared with you. And then after the hour, the clerk of the meeting will shake another friend's hand next to them or around them, and then everyone does the same, which I think happens in quite a lot of congregations. So everyone shakes hands. We didn't do that in COVID, so some meetings may still not do that, but that's generally what happens. Then there's a time when people might share things that aren't quite ministry. They might share notices at that time. They might talk about charities they're upholding. And there might be a time then when they might welcome new visitors, and you might be asked to, because they're curious, what led you to come here? And to talk about yourself a bit, and maybe you'll have some chances then it becomes a bit more informal then, so you can ask questions. It tends then to break up into, people might have brought stuff to eat. People might, there's normally tea, coffee, that sort of stuff, biscuits, and then you can meet the people in the meeting, and you can talk to them about what's led you here. You can talk about yourself. They'll be really, I promise you, I think probably something I should say very, very clearly is that they would be delighted to have you there. I think both times I've been, I felt so nervous going, because I'm like, oh no, I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm a super sociable person. And so I'm going there with a lot of nerves, and every time I'm just like, I shouldn't be like that, because they're just very, very happy to have someone come to their meeting, and they're very interested, and generally very interested. I think Quakers as people are very honest, and when if they're curious because they're curious. They're not trying to just be nice for niceness sake. So I think generally they're curious for the idea of they might have someone new in their meeting who they might eventually get to know really well. So take that time and meet people, but it depends how you are. If you're not someone for intense social gatherings, you might feel after that hour either that this is not for me at all, or you might feel, okay, that's enough for now. I've got the intel. I've dipped my toes in. I need to retreat and process what I've witnessed there, and then hopefully maybe you go back. Now I don't think I've done a video on this as well. I mean, I don't think necessarily it's expected that you don't have to go every Sunday. It's not like some denominations where that is expected, because that's when you receive sacraments and that sort of thing. There are no physical sacraments in a Quaker meeting. So you don't need to go every week. So you can fit it in around your schedule. Obviously, I think it's good to go. It is good to go every week, because it helps you build that relationship that I was talking about, which means that you can then give ministry, and you're building that relationship with the people in the meeting as well, which I think is really important. I think the more you do that, the more comfortable you'll feel, and the more fruitful the ministry and the worship would be. And the minute that you're attending a meeting for worship, you are, in terms of things that you can do, you are a Quaker effectively. You're not necessarily a member of the Quakers. There's a whole process that you go through, which makes you an official member. But attenders can do an awful lot more so than they can in other denominations. So there's nothing really extra that you could do. You can do as there are a bit, but being a member, it's not like you're an attender and that means like you're level 1 Quaker, and then everyone else can do all the other stuff. You can do everything, but it's just being a member obviously shows a certain higher level of commitment, I suppose. So yeah, that's probably a good starter as to how that first initial research and delving into your first Quaker meeting might look like. If you have done that already, what was it like? Are there any bits of advice that you think I should have included? If you are someone who is generally considering going to a Quaker meeting for worship, do you have any other questions? Is there anything that you'd like to know? Write it in the comments and I will get back to you. Otherwise, I'll see you again for the next video soon.
Thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, please do click on the thumbs up and the subscribe button to get more videos about Quakerism in the UK today. It really does help, and thanks once again.